Welcome everyone to today's Kinode office hours, where we're discussing the future of blockchain application development with the people who build Kinode OS. As usual, we're joined by our project lead Basile, lead developer Doria, and another of our developers Goldfinger, who recently built a zk-Rollup template that he also implemented as a chess app. You can thank him later for coming up with yet another way for people in crypto to lose money. But the thrust of today's conversation is not really about our chess app, but rather what's demonstrated by it. In this case, it's our commitment to one of these core theses of ours, which is that app developers should be able to ignore sort of all the ancillary requirements of app development and focus purely on realizing their core app logic or business logic. So Kinode takes on the heavy lifting of handling everything but the business logic, and I'd like one of you, maybe Doria said that his speaking voice is kind of going out on us, so maybe Goldfinger, you can carry this one. Can you elaborate on some of the specific technical challenges this approach helps developers overcome? Like, what are the annoyances, the sort of like standard boilerplate setup stuff, the headaches that come with like setting up an environment that the dApps run in and the users interact with? And so, yeah, like basically, what's the cruft that we're trying to get rid of and make sort of batteries included for from the developer perspective?
Yeah, so deploying a rollup is not easy. So like if you wanted to do something like the op stack, let's say, then like you can spin it up on your laptop pretty quickly, but then actually getting that into production is kind of a headache, which is why you see all these like big rollup as a service providers, which are essentially just like Web2 companies. And so in this world where we're gonna have like personal rollups or like, more like I don't want to say like modular, but like more like custom built things that are just written with like any language, just like consumer like mass adoption of like different languages and whatnot. Then you're gonna need like a lot of these nodes like spinning up, and you're not gonna be able to just like um, there's like a lot of like just like headache deploying like a new virtual machine every single time you want to deploy a roll up, and like networking like cross roll up like messaging is also a huge pain, right? Where you basically need to like tap into one of these huge bridge networks, and we should be able to tackle that pretty easily by just giving you access to message any other one of these Kinode rollups really easily. So there's just like basically a ton of stuff that you need to set up to even have a production chain. First of all, like getting like the nodes in the cloud, and then also setting up all this other like you basically like need oracles and um yeah, like just cross chain messaging stuff, right? That hold these like new chains hostage. And so yeah, we're basically trying to get all the barrier to entry down really really low.
Goldfinger, I feel like people that haven't gone deep in rollups don't realize how many very professional rollups are just one virtual server running somewhere posting proofs to transition the state of the rollup. What's really cool about what you've done is it gives that power to everybody who runs a Kinode, which is a very easy thing to do. I mean, you're running the chess rollup on your node. That's it. It's a single sequencer. And now anybody can do that for their app.
Right. And
Yeah,
one thing
well, I was gonna say like the amount of throughput you need to have a useful roll up if everything is architected well isn't that high, as you're saying, Doria. Like people are just like, blasting everything through like a beefy server somewhere. And like that's actually fine because like the theoretical limits beyond that aren't sort of super useful. Like even like you look at like basically Solana does like tons of work in order to like get like do consensus then around like okay you have a beefy server blasting stuff through, and at a certain point even if you remove that constraint and just like really optimize like we're going to throw as much through this pipe as we can, you still then run into like data issues where like you have to make sure that you can like index and store that amount of data as it's going. So like I guess my point at the end of the day is that like you can get very, very far for most of what people want to do with consensus systems with like sort of a single server running things, as long as everything else is architected well to be like secure and usable.
Yeah, you need to use zk proofs to verify the state transition, and you need permissionless exit in the case of no more state transitions coming from the single server. That is that is entirely that's the end game for application based rollups. And so we have that with this chess rollup. You can alter the chess rollup, you can fork it and change it to be a different game, a different application, and you can deploy it in a day. This is I think a big step forward for this thesis.
Yeah, listening to Basile speak there, it sounds like Kinode helps you throw a pipe.
Sure.
Sure.
There we go.
Yeah, so that's sort of like from the developer perspective. Doria, there was something that you were talking about to me yesterday, which besides just like developer, like making it easier for the developer, there's also sort of like some UX improvements that this gives as well. Can you at least tell me what you were talking about yesterday? Maybe go into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll have Goldfinger say something too, because this is an idea we've been developing recently where in the multi-rollup world, you need a very smart wallet to have good UX. You need a lot of state because you want to keep track of your assets on different rollups, and you want to be able to craft these entries and exits. I mean, it's nice to have permissionless exit in theory. A lot of big Ethereum layer twos have this. They've achieved it at a technical level, but since users can't do it effectively, it's a problem. Goldfinger, you've thought about that, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like basically, there's also like it's related to like the front end problem where basically like your access to like construct that transaction, like the average person is not going to be able to like go to GitHub or whatever and like be able or like even just construct the transaction on their own. Like they basically have to be able to do it through a front end, and you actually need to distribute that code because like if you do not have access to like the logic to like do an exit transaction, then that is this is like maybe like a third type of attack. So it's like a data withholding attack where like, if you don't have like the proof to exit, then like you can't actually, do the exit transaction. But also if you don't have the code to even like construct the transaction data, then like that's also kind of another sort of type of attack. And so, really the only solution is like have your own node and like run or like have the code on your own machine and not access it through the web. Um, and like this isn't like the only reason to have the code running on your own machine. Like there are other nice things about this. So like in the future, we're gonna in like the shared sequencer world, there's basically going to be you're going to be able to construct super transactions, which are like one transaction which is actually composed of like five different transactions or n different transactions across n different rollups, and that's going to execute like atomically. And so there's like a lot of complexity there of like, how do you actually construct this thing that touches like state on n different chains, to like, for like example applications, you'd be like, cross rollup arbitrage, right? Or even like leverage trading, right? Like you want to take out a loan and you want to make a swap in one transaction. But if Uniswap is on one like app chain and then Aave's on another, then like okay, now you have to construct this cross rollup transaction.
Yes, and notably, people talk about this as a negative. They talk about, oh, this is like the L2 issue. This is liquidity fragmentation. There's a truth to that. It's also extremely exciting for app composability because this hints at a future in which different apps are running, various pieces of logic that are extremely custom, and yet you can compose between them by basically running a code block on your local machine in a very smart wallet. You can imagine a prediction market, on an election and composing that with financial markets on an entirely different chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like you end up in this world where like you need like a super wallet, like sort of like MetaMask, where like you just tap into like a web front end that like gives you the transaction data that you need to like sign and like does all the compute that you need, is basically not enough. And I don't think anyone is really thinking that hard about this problem, other than the people that are like building the shared sequencers, which have like much more work to do than to think about like the smart wallet. And so like we're actually kind of in a very good place to make like the sort of next MetaMask, like the sort of MetaMask on steroids.
Yeah, people underestimate the degree to which DeFi front ends are hard because they're just very complex transaction builders. I mean, these are fully fledged pieces of software, right? You need to be able to install those on your node and run them in, a semi-automated way, a sovereign way, obviously. I mean, we just saw that
I
news about DeFi frontends being illegal, stuff like that.
I think the analogy about wallets is both good because it like gets the idea of like some meta piece of software that like bundles a lot of stuff up and like talks to a lot of parties and like does what you want, but also maybe bad or not sufficient because there's so much more going on. I think it is an interesting angle to go on in terms of explaining to people what it means to say that like crypto lacks an off-chain environment by just starting by saying wallets are kind of they're really sort of the first point of entry for off-chain environments. Like in some ways, they are the off-chain environment to a very, very large degree, except for front ends. And it's been sort of like hard enough to even get that working.
All right, I have a quick question that we sort of touched on a little bit, but Goldfinger, you did a lot of research on this, sort of leading up to your zk template. What happened recently to make this possible now? So there's like Succinct Labs. What's sort of like the landscape, and how has it changed to make this sort of like plug and play, I guess, zk-Rollup possible now?
Yeah, I'd say like that is like far and away like the most important thing aside from Keynote itself, where basically Succinct has done a great job of like getting us to like mass adoption of zk technology, where it's like, okay, you just write any Rust program and plug anything, and it's really really easy. And so, but even that is like sort of not enough. And so like what we had to do, or what I had to build, was basically like there's all this extra logic where like, okay, now you can zk prove any program, but you actually want to get that to the state of like a chain. Like, okay, now you're talking about like, okay, you need to like have all this logic around like verifying transactions, handling like bridging on and off, like how do you verify signatures. And so basically like I just wrote all that and package it into a thing so that now what you can do is just like plug in some arbitrary like business logic, of like instead of chess it's like blackjack or whatever, and then just kind of like run from there. So there's like even though Succinct has like done like a lot of lifting, there's still like a certain amount of
This
code
is
effort where I
this
think
is
there's
just
still
like such a common pattern though, where like the last few years there's been like really good primitives coming out and gaining like acceptance, and then like no one does the work to pull them together. And so I think even when you say like, oh, I just packaged it, I think that can lead people to like falsely believe that, oh, that's just like a couple of weeks of work for someone to package on top of what really matters, which is like the primitive. But like you're doing that on top of like a lot of additional work that we've done and that we like then built on top of like others' work. And so I think there's like actually like, I don't know. I just get like a little bit annoyed at how people like continually hand wave away that part and are like, oh yeah, but like obviously like, the super beefy primitive was like the main thing. And like that's like very, very rarely the case. And like and in the more general case, like when you look at everything else you need to make a roll up, that's using lots of other primitives that have been out for more like 5 years plus and like haven't been integrated. So I like definitely. I think I really like what Succinct is doing, and it's really really important, and we use it. But I definitely wouldn't see the high ground of like that's like the thing, because I think that there's like a number of these really important low level things that aren't like anywhere close to being well integrated into a tight system.
Yeah, I guess like this sort of goes to the point that like because we're like working with like the sort of state of the art technology and we're allowed to plug into it, that like we can start to compound where it's like all these kind of little primitives add up
Hmm.
into something that's like really easy to work with.
Yeah, and that's like important to convey, like that then gives the possibility of like actual new interesting stuff happening. Like, because the question in all of like crypto space and stuff adjacent to this is like, okay, what's taking so long on things? And the answer is that unlike in a lot of other software, it's been really, really hard to compound. And if you don't compound in software, that feels really slow because you're getting compared to other software domains where compounding does happen. And so you're like, the flat part of like, the beginning compared to like, quite literally an exponential curve. And so like not being able to compound is, I think, the biggest reason that like crypto, honestly, one thing I noticed in this cycle is that people are just like super cynical about crypto. And I think a lot of people like, I don't know, I don't respect the people at all who are like, oh yeah, you know what? I think meme coins really get at something like how like maybe meaning like is just constructed, or like maybe crypto is just useful for like gambling, and it's like no, it's because like y'all like losers like don't actually do the like necessary like schlep to like let your software compound and instead just sort of like sit back and hope stuff happens. Rant over.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to like another point where like there's like this theory that some people have, like, oh, like the EVM sort of has these network effects. It's sort of like the browser of like Web 2 or just like the web in general, right? Where it's like, okay, like everyone's just gonna be writing everything in JavaScript, and here we are with the same thing, and everything's gonna be written on the EVM. And so now what we need to do is just juice the fuck out of it and like start writing relational databases and whatever, writing like rewriting all of our software for the EVM. And this is I
No.
really don't believe that this is going to happen. And, the fact that like Sysinx Prover is like out and then we have like a whole stack in Rust that, or like really like any language also, right? That'll let you be able to like write a roll up in any language is,
Yeah,
like,
there's like a few aspects of this. So the first one is that like the rollups themselves get a lot better, which is this useful form of compounding on top of what they have, and that will further then compound when people can like more quickly iterate to interesting stuff in the rollup, like just like transaction logic lets you do more there. And then that's still like, orders of magnitude less than you need for like the applications people want to do. So it's also easier to connect those types of applications, both from the perspective of like, okay, we've done like the infra work, but also like it's just inherently easier to reason about and construct applications that aren't using the EVM and connect them to the rest of your off chain. We'll call it broadly wallet logic, even though wallet could be like a full-fledged like game or something. So like there's a lot of stuff that like fits together there and is both like, I guess, like a multiplier, but then also provides the opportunity to compound, because like I think EVM stuff has like a really bad compounding issue where it's very slow to do each new iteration because it's harder to write in, it's harder to test in. It's like, yeah, there's just like you don't have like libraries. It's hard to libraryize. It doesn't libraryize very well because then you have to go reason about aspects of that. So yeah, there's a lot of big stuff that gets unlocked.
yeah, I think like a good example of this is the chess roll up, where like to do this in Solidity, what you would have to do is rewrite an entire chess engine versus what I did was just pull an off the shelf chess engine that someone already wrote and like is secure and like is performant, right? And then just plug it into this. Um, and like the difference between having to write your own chess library and just pulling something off the shelf is pretty huge
It's like,
for being able
I
to
mean,
get
we're
stuff
talking about,
done.
I think if you add up the amount of time, it might be literally like, it's at least 10,000 times faster. It might be 100,000 or a million times faster. And then in the case where chess doesn't turn out to be the thing and you want to swap in another thing, you now don't have to write that. And I think that's the real win whenever you're talking about iteration, is like making it like, 10,000, 100,000 times faster isn't just that like you get the thing, but that like 95% of the time you don't want the thing and have to go to like another thing, and now you can do that really fast. And that's where like the real speed ups are, I think.
Yeah, so actually that's a great place to jump to the next question, which is um, let's just talk about the chess app. So Goldfinger, can you give us sort of an overview of the architecture, and after you do that, maybe run us through what it would take for another developer to take the ZK template that you built and make their own game?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, I would sort of describe what I did as not interesting, though maybe I'm just sort of like too deep in it. But it's basically like, it's hooked up, it's designed to hook into like MetaMask transactions. So you can just sign with your MetaMask wallet already and then just kind of use that to build transactions. So if you play with the app, which is going to be back live sometime right after this call, basically like what it'll have you do is like sign messages that are akin to like transactions of like, okay, do you want to start a game? Do you want to make this move? Do you want to withdraw? Stuff like that. And so that's like a lot of the work was there. And then yeah, there's also like we serve a front end. This is like another thing that like Kinode makes really easy, is that you can just like have like your precompiled JavaScript front end and just serve it from your node. Um, and then of course like anyone else that like downloads this will also like just get a sovereign front end like for free, which is really nice. Um, and then yeah, basically like the logic on the back end is like like once someone submits their transaction, there's like an RPC endpoint that's already hit up or set up, right? And that RPC can send you the state to the front end, or just like have like perform arbitrary reads that you want of the chain, and you can like sort of build your own API around that however way you want. accepts like post transactions for like handling transactions. And then there's this sort of like business logic of like, okay, now that you've like deserialized this transaction, you have it. What action are they trying to perform? Are they trying to start a new chess game? Are they trying to make a move? Are they trying to bridge? Are they trying to withdraw? And so on. So it's sort of like a quick overview of what it looks like. It's like very well documented on GitHub, which I guess the link will be somewhere accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be putting out a blog post tomorrow, and it's in there, so people can just keep an eye on the Twitter for tomorrow. So basically, people just have to, well, the developers just have to change out the change the execution engine, right? To change the details of the state and the transaction types and business logic, and then make some changes to the UI, and that's pretty much it for making a new game that does the same thing.
Yeah, so what I describe it is that it's like very similar to like sort of like the last generation of like Solidity, where it's like you had to build the business logic of the backend, which was just a smart contract, right? And that actually gave you like sort of like RPC calls out of the box, just because of the way like the EVM works. But now you're gonna have to like build your own like API, which is not that hard, right? Just like what reads are available and how are people gonna post transactions to the chain. Um, and then obviously like the business logic, right? So like that those two parts are the same, and then also like the front end, right? So any changes that you need to make to that, you have to make as well. But this is basically exactly how development worked last cycle, where like the sort of everything else is done for you out of the box. Like you don't need to, start up your own EVM node or start like indexing the chain yourself or like setting up your own RPC. That's done for you by someone else. And now you can just focus on like the actual interesting part, which is like the front end and like the business logic of like the back end code that is running on chain.
So
Now, can I add something to
yeah,
that?
go ahead.
So the chess example is constrained for good reason, but there is another layer of complexity that you can productively add to this, which is it's very easy to build out your execution engine logic and then separately build out a peer-to-peer protocol for interactions that don't have to pass through the sequencer. And to me, that's where things get really exciting with Kinode, because you have a system where both the sort of on-chain business logic and off-chain interactions can be written in the same programming language, stored in the same library, stored in the same application, and presented on the same front end, and it's totally seamless.
So this is maybe not as important as everything else we're talking about, but we might as well, since you've built this toy chess app, we might as well go through the chess app itself. Like, what is gameplay like specifically? What do I do as a user to play chess, and what can I expect from it?
Yeah, so basically you start by bridging on like a bit of ETH. This is on like Optimism mainnet right now, so you can bridge on like a small amount of ETH, or a large amount. I can't stop you, but I would not recommend it. And basically, what you do is like once your ETH is bridged on, what you can do is like challenge another wallet to a game, and then once they accept, you basically have a chessboard and you start making moves. And so like every single move has to be like signed by you, so it's like verifiable at the end. And then the winner of the chess game will just get the amount of like ether that you wagered. And that's it. And then lastly, if you want to withdraw, you can withdraw. So withdrawals are a little funky right now because to get it like truly zk, we're basically waiting on the succinct EVM verifier, which isn't out yet. So now I'm just doing it in like a sort of like proof of authority way. But eventually that will not be the case.
When you say that I have to sign every move, does that mean that I have to, like, my MetaMask is going to pop up and require the signature after every move?
Yes, and it feels much faster than like what you're thinking of because you're just signing a message, and because like the chess roll is not EVM, so we actually don't have to like go through the whole like, would you like to sign this transaction, like look at the gas limit and like do all that. What we're doing is we're just signing like messages, and those like text like like literally like a string of like characters, like those messages happen to mean something uh meaningful in this roll up, and so we use those for like moves. So like it is the MetaMask is popping up every single time, but it's like very fast and snappy.
Okay. It's just I'm trying to, like if I'm playing speed chess, I'm not playing speed chess for Ethereum. I guess is the point. Uh, but it's snappy, so that's good.
It's adding
All right.
maybe an extra like 1 to 2 seconds every single move you make, which is not
Yeah.
that bad.
But you don't actually need that, by the way. Like that, this can be worked around with Kinode because you can pass those signed messages around. Okay, well, there's one thing that you have to change. What you have to do is when you start a game or register, you have to present a new key as your signing key for the execution environment for that game, and then you can sign messages with that hot key, which you hold the private key for in your memory, as opposed to
Yes.
using your MetaMask the whole time.
Yeah. And so like the next thing where I like want to take this roll up is actually just instead of even using MetaMask at all, just using like the hotkeys the Keynote already has like built into it and those identities. So then we're not even dealing with um, MetaMask or like basic Ethereum identities, which are just like these hex strings that are completely unreadable. And instead, like the sort of balances and everything is just natively in like KNS IDs. So it'll just say like Goldfinger.os, like that balance is so and then
That's
it
a
just
big
uses
deal.
all the signing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'll be really, really convenient.
So like, what are some other? I mean, what can a developer make from your template now that is more or less painless, or like a n+1 step away from chess?
So I guess internally right now we have a like a prototype of like a blackjack game. So I think like other sort of like you know gambling adventures and stuff like that are definitely like a n+1 thing. Um, Let me think what else. Um,
Well, we
I
can
mean
get
like
like all of China if we implement mahjong, I think. So if we really want to pull in the money, we need to
yeah,
do mahjong at some point.
it's a good
Sorry,
idea.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think like after that, um, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of interested in these like sort of like massive like multiplayer games of just like trying to claim territory and like battle other players. And I think like we're a bit off from that, but I think I just need to make a couple upgrades and then like kind of this might work really well. Where like everyone's kind of like running their own sort of like mini like fiefdom, and then other players can like join it and like battle, and that contributes to like some global state of like their assets and so on. That's maybe n plus maybe not n+1 but like a little more than that, but like that's kind of like the direction where I want to take it, where it's like we're capable of doing that and like giving power to developers to make that stuff really easy.
I just want to remind people, by the way, if you want to raise your hand in the space and ask a question, you're welcome to do it. So just request to speak, and I'll acknowledge you, and you can ask questions.
Yeah,
All right. So,
the only thing that came to mind as I was saying this, and hopefully I'm coming through it, is we were talking about like the MetaMask thing or like how it feels different from current rollups, or like whatever. I think the other thing we maybe didn't touch on enough is how Keynote makes it easier to do types of rollups that that can handle it can be a lot faster. So basically, you can do stuff like data availability committees a lot easier, a lot more easily, and those will have like better UX. And then like I think the update where you can use Kinode itself to like do hot signing of stuff for a game or something, we're just adding that now. Like that didn't exist until like a day or two ago, and it's like in the process of getting added into core. So there's like a lot of this stuff that's also in flux and being released, but it adds up to like a very different developer experience pretty quickly for what you can provide in these types of games, which is really really rapid stuff with maybe only one commitment done, with signing in a traditional wallet while being safe enough and like getting this hot stuff. So I think this is like a pretty good I don't know. Again, it's like sort of that compounding where a lot of pieces come together, and then you can do something that's very, very different. And so I think as like Goldfinger keeps iterating on this stuff, I think one big thing we want to do is just kind of show some more stuff that opens people's minds as to what you can do. Where if this one shows, okay, you can do fast like signing and that part of it as part of the game, the next stuff would be okay, you don't need any signing at all. You can do a one-time thing, etc., and just go from there.
Yeah, I think like one thing that's gonna happen with the sort of like shared sequencer feature is that like the sort of intense like secure financial transactions will probably all exist on like one chain or one like roll up, and then a bunch of like game logic will kind of just like leech off of that, and like there's no reason for it to actually like implement its own like like logic or like ERC20 logic or anything like that, because all of the assets are already on one chain, and like all the logic is like audited, like secure. Um, and then you just like submit like atomic transactions and say like, hey, I want to make a move on this game, and it also happens to require that I like transfer money to this account, for example. So like stuff like that will sort of be like standard practice, I think, in like a couple of years.
Yeah, I want to comment on that. Like the getting rid of the signing after every move. I actually do this as a user, which is, like I play or have tried to play sort of these blockchain games, and it's it's a really bad user experience that I'm excited to hear we're going to potentially get rid of, because like if you play a game where you sort of let's say move from one tile to the next tile, and these things have to be signed for every time, because like the idea here, I think, is that game state is signed every time. um it's incredibly annoying to move, like, you can imagine a map where you move a character from one spot to another, or complete a battle or something like that, and every time you do a move you have to sign a transaction in MetaMask. So yeah, it's just a comment on how, like, sort of exciting from somebody who actually uses blockchain games to see, Web3 UX improve, because it's really bad from that perspective.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was trying to get at, was that like the you only actually want to use MetaMask or like your ledger when you're moving funds around, like when you're touching something very
Yeah,
sensitive.
right.
Like
Exactly right.
yeah, so
When
like
I'm
when you're
moving
at the
money,
bazaar, you
right, right,
know.
right. Yeah, that's the way I feel about it as well. Like I shouldn't have to do it every time, the game state changes or something like that. Um, so like how far are we, as maybe as Keynote or as an industry, from this like I guess I've been calling it like just the just right business logic goal. Like as a as an industry in general, as Keynote in particular, like how far away are we from that? Just write the business logic and nothing else. Is that even a goal that is actually achievable? I mean, will there always be some weird cruft that you just can't get around, or can we actually get it down to that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think so. In the way that I wrote it for the chest roll up, we're basically just waiting on the succinct like EVM verifier, um, and maybe some other pieces as well. Like I would need to like productionize it with like data availability and like stuff like that. But really, like not that far away. I think like the sort of like next question that'll be asked is basically just like how many other like blockchain primitives am I going to get access to, right? In one thing, like because you don't want anybody like rewriting anything at all, right? So like you don't want like the identity system fragmented across multiple chains at all. And so that's sort of um, the next question that'll be asked. I also think the next thing is like basically composability, right? So like you can have like your singular app chain right now, right? But if you don't have any liquidity on it, then like it's only so useful. And so like the next big thing is also like shared sequencers, where you can get these like atomic transactions across many different rollups, and that is I've heard the estimates are like one to like I've heard like early 2025. I think is when the first shared sequencers are supposed to be launched. But that it basically opens up this world where like your funds are all on one chain, which is very secure, and then the game logic is on another, and then you only have to like sign with one. Like you're basically like like the liquidity is no longer fragmented, and you can just have you know uh, these transactions that like operate on a game and on like the finance chain at
What's
once,
what's the
on the
secu-
annual swap.
what's the security what's the security assumption in that form of shared sequencing? Like, is it that all of your roll up, like all of your sort of universe of roll ups, can sort of choose to sort of trust the shared sequencer or trust some of the chains like that use it, or like what's the trust assumption?
Yeah, I'm not entirely certain. I think most of the engineering is going into like minimizing that trust assumption as much as possible, so that it is just like a trustless thing. And then the other complicated part of it is like the economics, where like if you opt into a shared sequencer, you're like giving up part of your revenue. Um, basically because like someone else is sequencing for you, like they're getting like all the MEV. And so like there's just all the energy is going into basically like reducing that trust assumption and then
Yeah, but
getting
that's
the
like,
economics right.
but that's a classic. That's like a classic situation. There will be some big chains that like do a shared sequencer and are basically like okay, we keep all the MEV, but this is useful for you from a business development point of view because now your chain will like run, your app will actually get liquidity, so it's like a marketing cost for you essentially. And then probably some big chains
Yeah.
will like even compete on okay, we share some of the MEV. So I actually think those economics are like it only takes one defecting big chain to first interop with everyone in that way, and then it only takes one more defecting chain to like start sharing MEV. So I bet that part would resolve itself pretty quickly. So I was asking more about,
Yeah.
does the big chain have to make any assumptions about what type of like rollup code you're running, or is it more just that like your rollup can decide what it wants to trust and what it wants to sort of like bridge across from there, and it just has access to the information now because the sequencing is shared.
That is
Like
a good
it's almost like
question. I don't.
what do you
Yeah.
have to audit for stuff to work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a good
Okay,
answer right now. And yeah, this stuff is sort of very far off and
my
kind of shadowy.
guess. Well, you can probably like narrow it down a bit. And sorry for the digression, but I think maybe for some people this is interesting because it's like still sort of on the topic. Um, I guess you could narrow it down a bit by kind of thinking of what would you want to exist if you were doing this kind of thing as a small chain, and probably what you would want to exist with shared sequencing is just there's a place where I can put my transactions so that they're sequenced with the transactions of a larger chain, and then my universe of rollups can all start making decisions based on that. I think is what you end up wanting, because that would like unlock a lot of, because if you're I guess the only other thing then is like how the stuff gets back to the main chain. Does the main chain need to trust your roll up? But as long as there's some kind of messaging thing there, a way for you to release like the funds, maybe that's fine. Anyway, yeah, I need to think about it more, look what they're doing, but I can sort of see some ways where you could make it like immediately useful if a big chain was participating in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting at is basically like super transactions, right? Where it's like, we don't actually like you want one big transaction that has like one on like, optimism where your liquidity is, and then one on like my app chain where like the game logic is. And you want both of those to go through or none of them to go
Right.
through at the same time. And that's basically the problem that they're trying to
Yeah,
solve.
and I think like yeah, and I think if you have that, as long essentially it almost comes down to, let's say, optimism or base, like sort of opening up their sequencing for you to put stuff into the flow of it, and then your chains can make decisions, and then I'm guessing like sort of getting it back to their chain is a slightly harder thing, but there's probably some ways around it. And I think just opening up that sequencing flow to like let other people bid to insert into it opens up a lot.
Right. Yes. I mean, like this
Is
this
my
cycle,
is
people
my
are talking about
guess.
like liquidity fragmentation across different L2s, but it's like next cycle, people are going to be talking about liquidity fragmentation across different shared sequencers. And like, if you want to launch a rollup, a big question is going to be like, well, which shared sequencer do you want to use? Right? Do you want to use like Ethel 1? Do you want to use
Yeah.
Espresso or one of these other people that are like engineering this?
And are those things? And are those going to be like? Are those still going to have like different options for data availability, where you can make your thing, where you can sort of choose to make your thing like less secure? Like I would guess
I,
yes.
I yeah, I believe so. Like
Because you
the
sort
idea
of
is to keep it modular.
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I guess like if we want to sort of sum this, like sort of tie this back to what we're doing for people, we're trying to put the pieces in place and work with the systems that are there now so that we're slightly ahead of things as this stuff like clarifies. And I think within like, a few weeks to months, we'll be in a place where if and when shared sequencing standards come out, we'll be ready to just sort of like plug into them and even be like doing stuff with them before they're out, because of course they'll have some like testing phase before stuff goes like, you know, fully live. So I think that's like a pretty big goal, is to like get a little bit ahead of where things are going.
Yeah, like it's definitely like the sort of next cycle, like big play on the horizon.
Dory, did you want to say something?
Yeah, and who?
All right. We're getting sort of close to the end, I think. So, unless anyone has any other questions, I'll get to my last one. And anyone who's listening, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question if you want to. But just this is for maybe Basile and Doria in particular. But what are we going to expect out of Kinode in the next 2 or 3 weeks? What's the alpha?
I mean, what I'm looking forward to is just continuing to put out interesting applications. I think that's the big thing right now. We've got all these primitives in place, and we're starting to see it compound, which is really, really nice. As Basile has mentioned, we're actually going to get some compounding going. And yeah, I think we're 2 or 3 weeks away from having the ability to really start onboarding non-technical users, meaning we have a hosting environment that we can give people access to where they can start downloading these apps on our app store and actually doing things on the network, which is that'll be a first. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, the other alpha from the app developer's standpoint is probably like the unlock of having like sort of more hot time. So like we'll have like, you know, basically being able to like easily and programmatically like sign stuff using your keynotes, like essentially what we used to call networking keys, but are actually more sort of just like hot signing keys that are listed in the PKI. And that should unlock a number of things in terms of just like there's a lot of reasons that it's useful to be able to like ergonomically and securely sign stuff in a hot way via programs and associate that with applications. So that's going to help a lot, even for our stuff we have like Telegram, for instance, and things like that. So I'm pretty excited about like getting that into our developers and like immediately adjacent developers' hands.
Great. All right. This is your last chance if anybody wants to ask any other questions. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. Is that it from everybody?
Oh, by the way, one other little tidbit I'll add is that we are working on our PKI, our sort of like, final version of it, or, non-beta version of it. And we're going to go with a token or basically a token account model for the nodes. So you are going to have basically a Gnosis mech associated with your like NFT uh, computer ID, and that's going to serve as sort of the wallet for a lot of these interactions. So that's underway.
Oh, very cool. All right. Anything else before we wrap it up? I think that's about it. Okay. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Make sure that you mark your calendars because we do this every Thursday at the same time on X, noon Eastern. Tomorrow there will be a blog post about the ZK template and the chess app. We'll be posting a link. If the chess app is up today, I'll put the link somewhere visible so people can play some chess. Otherwise, you'll see it tomorrow on the blog posts and on the Twitter. Also, I always put the links at the end of this, right after the space. So you can find the links to our developer docs if you write code. You'll also find a link to our Discord where the whole team hangs out pretty much all day, every day. You can learn about the project. You can ask questions in our support channel. You can like shit post in the commons area. And until next time, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to the developers for their time, and goodbye. Till next time.